we were always critiquing. We were always throwing grenades at things. Our projects were always critical. They were also always bringing up the issues, but they were never generating the solutions. I think we think about this quite often about making architecture out of very little, from very little. So, making it from ice, making it out of mist. Honestly, I didn't know we had an obsession with water. I didn't really know it. And then I looked in the book, and there's so many projects that are about water. There was a definite decision not to just be paper architecture. There's a lot of that interest in how we see things and how architecture sort of produces different kinds of effects and screens and frames. And so we wanted to highlight that. We thought it was fascinating and beautiful, and that the public would get a chance to actually walk through this New York that they never get a chance to see, but elevated, 25 feet in the air, and continuous without stopping for traffic. We just called it not architecture. Everything that's not conventionally known as architecture. It doesn't mean it's not architecture, really. It was kind of like a little bit ironic. The weeds, there were weeds there. And we loved that, It wasn't these beautiful flowers and everything. It was weeds that turned us on. There's no project in this book that I feel embarrassed about.
Hi, Liz.
Okay.
Very good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you so much for doing this interview. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And congratulations on this, completing this very monumental and very fundamental book. I have it in front of me, and I had to reorient my table to fit it on the table because it's
yes. Oh my God,
it
yes.
barely fits.
It's a double coffee table book.
Yes, it's a very unusual book, and so I have many unusual questions about what's in the book. So
Okay.
in the book's promotional material, I found it says that the book invites readers to bridge different modes of production and reconsider the limits of architecture. I want to know how long this book been in production, and if you could touch on its structure.
Okay. So I don't know if I think it's maybe in the book that we have for so many years sort of decided not to do a monograph and not to do like the studio's work. We do individual book projects. So we did one on the High Line, we did one on Lincoln Center. Yes, exactly. And we were going to do one on the Shed, and we might in fact do one on the Shed. And we did one on the Blur project, and so on. So like we take like projects that really need a lot of depth to explain, and we just decided all these years that let's just make a book on that, and so there was a point at which we realized that we're really missing, the opportunity to have some of our work, or a lot of our work in one place. And, I found that even traveling, to bring, people, I had to carry like 3 books with me. It was just crazy. So there was a kind of pragmatic reason to actually condense and bring together some of the studio's work. But we were resisting this for a very long time. And the reason we were resisting is that in these typical architecture monographs, there is this sort of short form of explaining the projects, and it becomes like a very conventional kind of book. They're big format, big pictures, and you can't really get into depth. So so you have this. And they usually come with a kind of promotional essay by a historian or something like that. we never wanted to do that. And so we resisted monograph until we finally couldn't stop resisting. And we said, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it on our terms, and we're going to make the book into a project itself, and so therefore we said, okay, if we're going to bring together, like to truly represent the studio, we have a range of work that we do in different scales and different media. How do we present this in a book form? That was a dilemma. And so this gets to your other question about the structure of the book. We started to look at how to do it like almost a Yello Pages, like a really fat volume, and rather than alphabetically, we could do it chronologically and put all of our work in there. And we found that, when we made some mock-ups of ideas for the book and how to shape it, we realized it doesn't make any sense when you present it chronologically, even though it's truly the way that we worked on it. It's just everything is feathered together, and we don't really make so much distinctions between this architecture, this not architecture, right? Or this is a performance, or this is, it's all together, it's all synthetic, and it all is the production of the studio and the partners and the staff. And so, but when you put it together, it feels like hodgepodge chronologically. You cannot find relationships between things because those relationships are sometimes a year away or multiple years away, a different kind of thing. So we tried this format of architecture and everything outside of the professional architectural, like, conventions, which includes the design of objects, it designs curatorial projects, it includes installations and media projects and so forth, even book projects. So there's so many different modes that we work in that we just called it not architecture. Everything that's not conventionally known as architecture. It doesn't mean it's not architecture, really. It was kind of like a little bit ironic. It's all architecture, but it's and what we say in the preface that it's just not in the conventional norms, of an architectural practice. And we found that if we make it in 2 volumes, then we could cross-reference between the volumes in a much easier way. And that's how the structure got to be what you're holding there, is that the 2 volumes really should not be 2 separate volumes that you pull out of a sleeve. They should be conjoined. And that's where the unique format of, when you open this book, and you can open 2 books at the same time, and then you can look at one or look at the other in whatever order you want to. You use the tables of content instead of table of contents. You use, and you find the project and you look at the project, or you just leaf through from beginning to end, however you want to look at it. And you find these manicules, these along the way that point to a reference in the other book.
You actually responded, you responded to my next question. I was going to ask you, how come you are, so seamlessly and so fundamentally, interdisciplinary architect, and you decided to, subdivide your book into this 2 architecture where you just explained it, and you don't really see the difference. You take on so many different projects for different reasons, and all of it is architecture. So now, really.
We just, the term, if we, the term architecture, not architecture, was more like it has a kind of nice ring, it has a nice sound, and it's a nice title. But it was always meant to be kind of like this seeming contradiction, but then you really see what the work is, and it explains at the beginning this notion of why we did it and why we we did it that way.
A number of architects such as Remco House, for example, organize his projects into size, and BRK English organize his projects into temperature. So there was a kind of pressure, I'm sure, to find the right way to organize the book and to do it very unconventionally.
I actually, I never thought about that, but that through what they were doing, but um, it's the problem, I think of, how do you make a structure, how do you make a body of work seem like some kind of like something that a reader could digest. You know, we don't have to make sense of it because it makes sense to us. All of it makes sense to us. But to a reader and to put it forward into like a volume of stuff, you need a story, you need a structure, you need like something, an organizing principle. And for us, there was just the obvious way to do it.
So, as you said, this is the first of your comprehensive monograph. I understand why you waited so long. It's about 100 projects that you included, right? There are about 2,000 images. It has 800 pages. So, is this the entire output of DS plus R, or did
No.
you select projects out of many more projects?
Yes, we selected projects, but there are so many unbuilt projects, many, many, many. So we didn't show everything. We did a selection, but we showed most of the most important ones, and the ones that we felt like needed to be, you know, in one place. And so, there were a lot of decisions about, like we would have had more pages. It was so hard to resist the temptation to make the book, 1,000 pages. It's like almost 800 pages now. And, there was a kind of heaviness factor, like got to be so hard to work, and like that it would discourage people. And also the cost, would be really crazy, of the cost of the book. So I think, we settled, it went back and forth a lot, when we were preparing it, just like limiting it, and how can we tell the story in two spreads, or how can we tell it in 10 spreads, and so forth. So there was a lot of editing involved. There was much more material than we could use.
I want you to talk a little bit about the book's design. What were your initial objections? Because the result is a kind of persistent refusal of, playing by the rules, which is something that you, insist on in all of your projects. Would you describe how the process, started, and
What were the objectives?
Yeah, I think, Phaidon originally just simply said, we'd love a monograph of your work. And, this is where we said, okay, not a normal monograph. We can't do that. And because we did all of these book projects, we insist on designing them. We did this other one. I don't know if you know the look, this project. They're like, these are independent. I'm just looking at this thing, taking it off of my shelf. This one,
okay,
it's called The
yes.
Look. And this one is, it's a book project. It's all about, it takes place in the glass house.
Oh, yes.
Johnson's glass house, right? Philip Johnson. So, this book, for example, all of these books we do here because we don't, the book to us is a project. It's not just, evidence of a project having happened. It's a project in itself. So when because we delayed this monograph for so long, And it was going to be so hard that I said, okay, the only way to actually do it is to get a designer to do it, is to work with a designer. And so, over the years, we've had a great relationship with 2x4. And that was Phaidon was very happy with 2x4, and we started together with 2x4, and we had this notion of a Yello Pages, like this big fat books, that like everything is in this book, and it's floppy, but it's fat. And they did a great job in marking it up and starting to work on it. And then we said, no, there's just no way that this could represent our studio. It didn't work. And then we started looking at formats ourselves. And sooner or later, we said, like, we might as well just do it. 2x4 was always there, was always involved, and there was a happy exchange. But we did what we were afraid of is when we take on the book, it just takes forever. And because we want to oversee every detail, So, 2x4 was definitely involved, but the process was that we formulated the structure. We started to work with their graphic layout of the page, and then we started to work on like, okay, now we need to figure out like how to describe, how much space do we use for text, and so forth, and so the project grew. We also decided not to have anyone write on our work, that this was going to be our voice, throughout the book, explaining our projects, and without anyone validating, or authorizing this, like a typical monograph. But instead, we chose to have dialogues, with various people, and also pluck some old dialogues that we had, and reprint them. And so that's what there are spacers in the book of these dialogues, and that interrupt the flow a bit. And they're placed in places that are relatively, related in a sense. So, dialogues around our early work are in the, set in non-architecture, or around the late work on specific things that are called out. And so we had these, really nice dialogues, with people. We had to decide who, and that was a whole kind of project in and of itself. So the book took a very long time to do. It took a couple of years to do. But because it just had to be right, and it had to be, a lot of the stuff had to be rewritten, because it was all different formats and for all different reasons, some short, some long explanations, and we had to just somehow make it all feel right for the book. So,
Speaking of dialogues, would you say, or maybe this is just my imagination, that there is a certain dialogue with your own work? For example, the unrealized IB Museum, which also is kind of split between the two functions. One is to display art, one is to produce art. Would you say this project, Unrealized, unfortunately, served as a kind of model for the book as well?
yes, that's a good idea. That's a good point.
But this is in retrospect.
Yeah, you're right, because there is a kind of binary, play in a lot of our work. Some of it is a false binary, like the architecture, not architecture is a false kind of division. But in that project, there was an actual, division of the public and private networks that are combed between each other. And this combing we also used at the business school at Columbia, this combing of the students and the faculty together, even though it's not articulated the same way. But there's this dialogue that's very often apparent in certain projects where the project is in conversation with itself, with the conventions of its own program, populations that it serves, that kind of thing. That would be another obsession, maybe another structure that we could have added to the tables of content.
Yeah, as far as the obsessions, there are actually many more than what you mentioned, because again, limited by only 800 pages.
You're right, it's true. I'm curious to know which ones you thought we left out.
And we will cover that. Before going into some of the projects in the book, I would like to read a few of your remarks, that I put together. I mean, these are kind of quotes and parts of quotes. You said, "I had no intention to be an architect. We do everything differently. We think differently. Every project is an experiment. Naivete is very important. We've never stopped being rebellious. We are always questioning the status quo and what is inherited. We always wanted to be outsiders and thought of us architects by artists and as artists by architects. We play by the rules selectively. We make everything up. I'm interested in the politics of architecture. You identify your work with a form of disobedience, challenging the conventions of the everyday, beautiful atmospheres, and institutional critique. And once speaking about your work, you said the audience started to matter. So my question is, who is your audience and how do you try to engage with this audience? And the reason I'm asking you this because I think you are very much interested in kind of going outside of the limits and borders of architecture. And I also like to compare the experience of architecture to literature, film, theater. So if you could talk about who your audience.
Okay. Maybe I could talk about this through the project that was the turning point for us. From the point where I left school and Rick and I started to work together, we did a couple of, more sort of, he had a practice before, and there were some projects that he that I participated in that were left over from his practice, and there were more, architectural elements. But we decided that we were more interested in evolving a new kind of practice. We were both teaching at the time, and we were interested in rethinking a lot of conventions and conventions of the institution, conventions of public space, and so forth. And we had an outlet to do this in public space. Creative Time asked us to do some projects, and Creation Production Company. We met a lot of people from downtown New York, and we started to evolve this independent practice. It was really happy for me, because that's really what I was interested in doing, and the times were right for that. Our audience at that time were students, the architectural academics, academia in general, an art audience, and basically a cultural audience, mostly a New York centric audience, and so forth. So we did theatrical productions, we did installations of different scales, we just did it. It was like the work that we did. I never really thought about the audience. It was just like, oh, people are interested, that's great, but it was good to do it. There was a definite decision not to just be paper architecture, because at the time, some of our colleagues were happy to just do things in print or put things up on a gallery wall, drawings on a gallery wall, and we were not was not our interest. It was more sort of disturbing people in space and changing behaviors and so forth. So it was always performance in some way, some performance oriented. Okay, the project that changed everything for us was the Blur building. And the Blur building was around 2002. I think we started planning in 2001, or something like that, earlier maybe. And this project, when we started to think about it initially, it was around the Victorian novel. It was around the problematizing vision. It was around, you know, different researches that we were doing on vision. Also, the theory of the cloud, Damish's beautiful book, art historical book, The Theory of the Cloud. And so we were, it was very lofty and it was theory based. And we wanted to make this experiential thing, but we were drawing from, in a more academic way, our research and our kind of experiment. What happened was the project became really incredibly popular. And we didn't realize what we were making. We were making a spectacle, we were making an EXPO spectacle. And it was every kid, every student was required in the Swiss system to go there, that was a requirement. You know that. And then, there was like grandmas that went there. I went there with my mother and she didn't really understand why we were doing it, but it was kind of beautiful. And I walked there with many grandmothers, actually, like elderly people and people from all different walks of life, not necessarily academics, even though Hubert Damisch was there in it. I lost him. He came with Tony Vidler and they got lost someplace. I didn't know where they went. So that was it was a beautiful moment because I realized that, and there was lines of people, waiting to get in and there were little children and it was just, to me, and what people got out of it, some people thought it represented, like ascension, like some kind of religious ascension, and some people thought it was like surreal, and it was made to be surreal, and people had like very very the Swiss government in the end, the reason why it became so popular and became on stamps, it was like on postage stamps and everything, that it came to represent the Swiss doubt, their doubt, about the EU, about being like, what are they, like exactly Europe, like where do they stand on, all these controversial issues, being neutral. It was this Swiss doubt. And what we got out of that whole experience was that this was a machine to make meanings off of, that it was a strong project. And the reason it was strong was that it could be interpreted in so many ways by so many different people. And it still functioned, for people that were looking, they saw in it what they wanted to see. And it still worked on our terms. And that's when audience started to matter, that we realized that this broad appeal meant that the project was actually better, than some of the work that we had done before, because it touched many, many people in many different ways. And that period of time, that 2002, that period of time was when we were also, 2003, we started working on the High Line at the end of 2003. In 2004, Lincoln Center. Our work changed scale. And it was all of a sudden, urban, it coincided with post 9/11, and the Bloomberg administration. We had opportunities to do things. And the High Line was, it was really the same mentality. Like, how do we turn this thing, now that we appreciated the large audience, realize we're doing something, like in New York that was, a mile and a half long. And it's a environmental project of a very large proportion that was permanent. And how do we make this really, relate to lots of different audiences? So it's just started to be a consciousness, not that we would design it differently for ourselves and for the general public, but it was a consciousness that we realized that, the broader the audience, perhaps the better the work.
Since you started talking about the Bloor building, I want to ask you if maybe you could talk a little bit about the challenges of making it. And before doing that, I want to read a few of the identities that this project took that you already started listing, because it's such a quintessential project. You called it a spectacular anti-spectacle, a machine for making metaphors, the architecture of atmospheres, the machine that produced artificial nature, an exhibition with nothing to see and nothing to do. And you actually love this idea of, to do nothing, and to do nothing in so many different ways. A machine for making metaphors. I feel like I already said that.
Yeah, that's what we were just also, what I was describing. Yeah.
About rethinking our dependence on vision and making a building out of water. And so if you could touch a little bit about, a little bit on the challenge of actually making it because of all this purification and.
Yeah. So initially, we started to work with a team. We were on a team when we made the proposal for the competition. And the site that we had was inland. And we said we wanted to actually do the project in the lake. And the team disagreed that we should really make it inland. So we said, okay, let's divide the work. We'll do a project on the lake, and you guys, the landscape architects, do the project, inland. And then we sort of divided the project, and it was interesting. But we were really like, this was a project that we had to make. And then we had this idea that wouldn't it be cool to make the water not only the site, but the primary material of the project. And since it was an expo, it was an art expo, then, we didn't have any program really. And so couldn't we make the project actually about making the space, the building, and so one thing led to another, and we decided, well, let's just pump the water. It's Switzerland. Let's just pump the water. Maybe we can shoot it out of nozzles. We consulted with Fujiko Nakaya, who did the expo in where was it, in the Osaka expo in the 70s, and she, yeah, 70, yeah. And it was, it was like a geodesic dome, and it had like lots of, nozzles. And she actually patented, she worked with an agriculture company in California and had a patented nozzle. And so, we contacted her and we said, could you be a consultant to us, because we want to make this thing. And she said, because there was no dome, there was no interior space. And she said, no, it's not going to work. It can't work. And because it's just going to blow away. And we said, but like, if we make a lot of nozzles, really a lot, and we worked with a company that she had worked with in California. And she was like loosely a consultant to us. But she was actually skeptical about it. And we worked with this company, and it couldn't be stable. There's no way to make it stable because the wind would blow. Yes, it would blow away and then it would come right back. It wouldn't be like forever gone because it's always producing, a mist, but it would be in different configurations. And so this we work with some technology folks to figure out how to make these nozzles, it's 35,000 nozzles or something, a huge amount, to actually make it a smart system. So there would be, basically a weather station there, and it would be communicating with this system that made some choices as to if the wind was coming from here and it was high humidity, this would be a response. So it was a kind of smart system, very early, like it was, that 2000 that we were dreaming this up. And it was like an AI. It had to be learned. It had to be taught, reaction. So, it was this kind of weather, this wind comes, this is the temperature, this is the dew point, and so we had this program, relatively, primitive from our terms now, but that would zone the amount of pressure that was going on in certain nozzles, and others would get less pressure and others would get more. And so this is something we learned along the way because we had no idea how to do this. We had to bring in, people that understood the technology. The thing that we missed along the way was that the water was polluted. This was a Swiss lake, and we thought, Swiss lakes must be pure and perfect and beautiful. And it turned out that there was, well, it was somewhat polluted, but also phytoplankton, which is this natural thing that blossoms, in the springtime. And then, you have this basically this living organism that comes through and clogs everything. It basically would clog our nozzles and so forth. So we had to figure out how to filter it. But it wasn't only that. The filtration was also that this is something that we learned later, that if we actually breathed, if the nozzles were broad enough to actually allow this water to come through, we would be breathing it, we would be inhaling it, and that would cause Legionnaire's disease. We had bacteria in the air that we would be breathing, and we didn't really understand that. So we had to purify the water, and so we've got serious water engineers. There were other people involved, that were testing the water, but we never really considered phytoplankton. And anyway, with the water engineers came the result that the water had to go through like serious filtration. And because this was expensive to get these, the filtration system, we decided, and it was getting late in time, to basically hook it up to city water. So even though it was in the lake, we would hit it connected to city water, and therefore, the water would be clean enough. Well, apparently, what happened was when they hooked it to city water, no one could flush their toilets at home in Yverdon-les-Bains. So, okay, we reverted back to the lake water, thank God. And, we got the filtration system.
So in the end,
yeah, we got to make it work. Yeah, because, and so this is not so strange. And this is where, that some of those quotes, it helps to be naive, because if we were naive, we would have never done this because it's too complicated, it's too expensive, it's, all of that, it's too dangerous and all that. But in the end, because we went through that process and because we learned along the way and we brought in more experts and we, actually evolved this with a team, we were able to realize the original idea. We were able to nudge it, back and forth, and we're able to make decisions along the way around, the density and the, how we would actually distribute this and all that. So it wasn't like we were, just handed it over to experts. We were involved all the way through to every single decision. But we, the team grew and the intelligence of the project grew. And by the way, I left out that, that this was just on 4 columns, so it was a tensegrity structure. So already it was an experimental structure. And Pedretti, we had a great engineer in Switzerland that we worked with, to minimize the impact on the lake bed, so only 4 spots. And then when, we were through with the EXPO, it would be just taken apart, and then it could be reused. The steel could be reused, and so forth. So we're very conscious of that, to not make any traces, leave any traces behind of this project.
Going back to the book, I want to ask you about tables of content. There are multiple, and some of that is repeated in each of the books. And so it is organized chronologically, alphabetically, typologically, by medium, into dialogues, and by obsession. So I want to list some of the obsessions. I really like it. So it's artificial nature, boredom, consumerism, crime, domesticity, fashion, glass, robots, storytelling, tourism, visuality, surveillance, voyeurism, exhibitionism, and weather. And when I spoke to you and Rick some years ago, you actually named more, which are not in the book. And you said that you were also interested in technology, publicness, privateness, theatricality, turning views on and off, normalcy, discomfort, happiness, and removing all labels. And so how do you bring all of this interest, all of these obsessions into your work?
I don't think you do it consciously. I think that's the pathology of the obsession, is that it just comes out, and it comes out in different projects in different ways, because it's sort of like ongoing inquiry into something, and you're never satisfied that you've done that, like this visuality, this issue of visuality, which includes surveillance, and it includes, like the blur, where you can't actually see anything, and it includes, framing, like, on the, on the High Line, where we have that view on 10th Avenue, looking, all these projects, like there's this obsession with looking and spectatorship, even, our installations, in museums, and exhibitions that we curate. There's a lot of that interest in how we see things, and how architecture sort of produces different kinds of effects and screens and frames and everything that allows you, and impasses even in the blur that you can't see. So that kind of thing, it just keeps going. I never think about it. It's just, it finds its way into many projects. And the same thing with, many of these other things like water. Honestly, I didn't know we had an obsession with water. I didn't really know it. And then I looked in the book, and there's so many projects that are about water, different, like frozen water, mist water, water, shooting water, and, or framing water. I never really think of water as an obsession, but when we did the book, we realized that it's kind of an ongoing thing that we can't seem to get away from. And I think that this nothingness, that was one of the true, things that I think we think about this quite often, about making architecture out of very little, from very little. So, making it from ice, making it out of mist, and doing the shirt project, Bad Press, that, we just take a ready-made, something that's already there, and we just transform it. This sort of obsession with, making architecture out with very little is this obsession with nothingness. It has been there forever, and it probably will continue, and it'll make its way into some projects, not all projects, but
There
you
is
know.
another obsession with purifying water, and I just read that your realized uh, bar or whatever it's called that you did together with Aaron Betsky in 2008. It's going to be realized in this year's Venice Biennale. If you could,
Yeah.
so
Yes.
congratulations on that, and if you could.
Well, thank you. Yes, we, in this water theme that we didn't realize that, this obsession existed. When we were invited to the 2008 Biennale by Aaron, we had this idea. We were in the Arsenale, and we had this idea to interrupt the flow of the Arsenale by taking water out of the canal, pumping it out of the canal, and purifying it in front of, whatever in the audience, and then creating the best espresso in Italy. So we wanted to do this in 2008. We illustrated it. Aaron loved it, and we got it. We had a water engineering company that technically, worked out, exactly how we could do that safely. And we were on our way to having this approved, but something got in the way. And to this day, we don't exactly know why it was not approved to go forward. Okay, fast forward to Carlo today. Several months ago, he said, we'd like you to do a special project, and maybe could you do this or this or this or this? And we said, we want to do the project that we didn't realize in 2008. And, when Aaron, we're doing it with Aaron's curation. And so Carlo was like, well, let's ask Aaron to be involved. And it was really nice. It was very sort of fluid. And we didn't, now we're not doing it in the Arsenal. We're doing it just on the corner outside, right on the lagoon, on the edge of the lagoon. So it's very obvious how the water is working and the tanks and the purification. And so we know it was approved by the city. It's fully engineered, the system is fully engineered. And now we're actively working on, the details and the steel work and all of that and trying to make it hit a budget. So
are you going to sell whatever is the product?
No.
Is it is it espresso? What is it?
We're going to sell the espresso. I thought you meant the installation. This is a very good question. It could go either way. So there's one theory that it's sort of self-service because we need to operate. We need an operator. Like we need someone to sort of clean everything, to basically to oversee, to stock the coffee, and all that. We need an operator. And to do this over 7 months or whatever the duration is of the Biennale, it was very expensive. And so we would serve free coffee. People would serve themselves, kind of, like you would, like, and with paper cups and so forth. And that's one sort of strategy. The other strategy is that the Biennale has a contract with a company, all the food service. And so that, they would operate this and they would then oversee it, make sure that, there was someone serving, make sure that that everything was cleaned and overseeing all of that. And that was going to be a different model. And then you would pay for the coffee, and that's where we are today. That it's like a cafe. It's like a normal cafe, but it only serves espresso. And it's like, you have to be, like I'm going to do the first cup of coffee and make sure that I'm still alive, but it's going to be totally, safe, and the water is going to be monitored all the time. And we have the whole system is like, it's perfectly safe. We actually have a chef, a 2-star Michelin chef that's going to tweak the taste So because we want to taste Venice. You want to taste Venice in this espresso.
It's memorable.
So so it's like it's a tweak. So we'll see. We're just starting that conversation.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about the High Line. Since it's another quintessential project, you said the High Line is the place to escape the city. And then you also said that one goes to the High Line to enter the city. And then you said it was the city's conscience. And it obviously about doing nothing in interesting ways. So if you could talk about this provocations and what were some of the most, some of the initial
objectives and provocations
when you started the High Line?
Well, we discovered this overgrown, self-seeded landscape that was quite beautiful. With it was also a kind of junkyard, because people were shooting heroin there and leaving needles. It wasn't a place that you're supposed to be, so people snuck in, threw chairs out, threw garbage into the High Line from their windows or fire escapes, whatever. But at the same time that it was just because of the sort of strange ecosystem that's there. There are tall buildings that sort of produce shade. There are clearings where there's like constant sun, southern sun. There are areas that have more wind, they're more windblown. Other places are very static. And we found that the way, these seeds that were airborne, from New York and also came off of railway cars, sort of produced this incredible landscape that was already there. And we wanted to we knew we had to clear off the High Line because there was toxicity in it and all of that, and we had to reinforce the structure and the bathtub that was there, the concrete bathtub, and so forth. That we, in the end, we wanted to bring back some of these species, but we wanted to also add other species. So that was one of the motivations, was to sort of, what we found there, we wanted to bring back, not reproduce, but, reinterpret forward into these microcosm, microclimates. The other thing is that it was like the part of New York that you weren't supposed to see. There was this sort of back alleys, there were smokestacks, there were sort of, party walls, there were solid, there were the backs of billboards. It was like the part of New York that was, not the beautiful photogenic parts of New York that you would send a postcard or do a selfie in front of, like the Statue of Liberty and, like the sights of New York. It was like the unconscious of New York. It's what was there in this industrial past. And so we wanted to highlight that. We thought it was fascinating and beautiful. And that the public would get a chance to actually walk through this other New York, this New York that they never get a chance to see, but elevated, 25 feet in the air and continuous without stopping for traffic. It's like you didn't have green lights and red lights, on it, but you could walk for a mile and a half and be uninterrupted. So that was another sort of opportunity, and the nothingness, the where it hits that theme is that it's a New York City park in the end, but you can't throw a ball, you can't throw a frisbee, you can't bring your bike up there or your roller blades. You can't bring a dog, you can't walk your dog on there. You really can't do anything on the High Line except walk and sit.
You have to
like
do it very slowly.
Yes, exactly. Well, you know well, you do it slowly because it's crowded on Sundays, so you have to do it slowly. But generally, the idea is that it brings back this very old-fashioned idea of the promenade. A promenade in the air in this sort of New York's unconscious, where there's really nothing to do, and I think that's why it became so popular, is because you can't, divert your interest away from other people. You're walking, it's so narrow. You see people coming in the other direction. It produces a kind of shared experience that we didn't really even understand or anticipate. And then when, we made these locations where you can sit that are different from, like the lounge chairs on the tracks, or the sunken overlook over 10th Avenue, where you're literally looking at taillights, going up 10th Avenue, going north. And we realized that, that this moment, like especially that area where you're truly looking at something that's very boring, like this obsession with boredom also, like you're seeing something that's very banal, but in this very fresh and new way, and it's mesmerizing. And it's kind of like looking at a lava lamp or looking into a fireplace, It's like barely changes, but it's intoxicating to look at it. And so, this is one of the realizations we made when we did the project, that, we're so glued to our screens and to, what we do in everyday life, that the notion of public space, everybody said, oh, nobody's going to go to a park anymore because, now we're obsessed with screens. Well, we made a screen there, just looking at 10th Avenue. And it's just by framing what's already there, like people just get mesmerized looking at it. So, it was like a summary of many experiments. Like there's a little bit of blur there, that large environmental project was a little bit of, the framing that we had done, on the slow house, where we just, had a camera, on the horizon, and it was, just there was a mediatic and there was a real, these themes are like they traverse the work, and they continue to be sort of topics that we're interested in. But that's how the Highline, those are ideas that, prompted the Highline. And then, of course, as we got more specific, it was like the paving system and the planting. And Peter Udolph was, brilliant with a planting, the different kinds of species that he interpreted really from, and James Corner as well, from what was already there, the tall grasses, the weeds, there were weeds there. And we love that, that it wasn't these beautiful flowers and everything. It was weeds that turned us on. So tall grasses and that's why, when you go there, you see in the winter, there are also things that look really interesting in the winter. And, and in the spring it changes, and the fall it changes continually. There are things, there are surprises that keep coming up.
I know that when you start a project, you typically start with a sketch. You're sketching on paper and napkins. Nevertheless, when I went through this book, I didn't see that. So I wonder why this was not included if you really wanted to celebrate the design process.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that like I fill, this one isn't filled, but I fill notebooks with sketches, Rick does as well, and Charles does tons of sketches, and Ben, they're, everyone here does lots of sketching. But it wasn't, the mission on this project to show the whole process. Because if we did, we would show, it's not only sketches, we make sketch models, we make many versions of the same project. I think on the ICA, we probably showed, like there was a table full of models, I think, there may be like so many iterations. So in the process, there's just so much, like it's not like a lightning bolt from God, like we know exactly what to do immediately. There's an enormous amount of work, but we decided, in the end that the book there just wasn't enough space in the book to really show the formation of the project. Sometimes there's a diagram, a concept diagram, which is like the most basic, irreducible way of explaining the project. And then, and you're right, like I wish there were more sketches. We did show drawings, like on some of the projects we had. The drawings, sometimes we had to remake the drawings. But those original sketches, are trapped in sketchbooks that are, I often just sketch on something and I throw it out. Like our archive is so incomplete, doesn't have the kinds of things that every architect would save, like the stack of, sketches and then, identify everything that's meaningful and just put it away someplace. Just throw things out all the time. As long as they serve the purpose of getting an idea across, and then we evolve the idea through many different formats, and then we arrive at the thing. It is something in a way I regret, because there's a lot of really interesting thinking in the sketching, and they're quite.
I want to ask you about the shed and your inspiration that you took from Cedric Price. And I found out from your interview with Hans Ulrich Obrist that you actually met Cedric Price in person when you just.
Oh, yes, it's true. Yeah.
So
yes,
you could maybe touch a little bit on that.
So yeah, the Fun Palace was a source of inspiration. I learned about it when I was, a student, and then, later I somehow it kept coming up, and we were, fans of Archigram and other architects of that period. But when we started to do the shed, the model was, and the question really that we asked was how to make a building for a constantly evolving and changing program, and it was for contemporary art, and just by definition, contemporary meant it always has to change, but how do you make a permanent building for it? And so, the Fun Palace was a model in its own way. We couldn't do that, because that was of its time. It was meant to be a 10-year building, and it was meant to be plug-in, and ours was not that. It was motivated by other ways of thinking about permanence and transience. We had a site that was too small, and we, had to extend the site somehow, to really make it for contemporary art and performance and everything, all the arts under one roof that we, wanted to do. Okay, so when was this? I think it was in 1999, and I remember, the reason I remember, and I might have gotten the date wrong, because we had just won a MacArthur, and I was on a jury. The CCA had coordinated a competition for Hudson Yards, precisely for Hudson Yards. And it was Phyllis Lambert behind this, and she invited like 6 or 7 or 8 architects, I don't remember. And Peter Eisenman was among them, and Jesse Reiser was among them, and Cedric Price was among them. And there were others who I can't remember right off the bat. I was invited to be a juror on that project. This is way before the shed. And so there's this big open Hudson Yards there, and I'm on the jury, and it was actually just a couple of days before, that we learned that we had the first MacArthur in architecture, and I was coming to this jury with people that I knew were established architects that never got a MacArthur, and so I felt like guilt-ridden in a way that we had gotten this honor, but, people were looking at us like really curiously, like, who are we to have gotten a
One
MacArthur?
of the people
So
was Isozaki, who
I
is
think Isosaki was on the jury. Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
interview was included into this book as well.
Okay. Yeah. Isosaki, there's an interview because Isosaki asked us to actually do a housing project in Gifu in Japan. So that's a separate thing. And that was related to that. But plus, Isosaki got us an exhibition, in Tokyo where we showed he saw the shirts, he saw the press shirts. And then we had an exhibition on the Slow House there on these various models and so forth. But anyways, so coming back to the competition, so we had the presentations in front, and everybody presented, and then we met at the end of the day. The jury met at the end of the day. But one of the presenters was Cedric Price. And just the strangest, ultimately what turned out to be this incredible, coincidence was, he did his project on Hudson Yards, and it was actually nothing. He didn't put anything on the site. And he said that this would be the lungs of the city. I think he put some towers in the corners, and it was a very minimal project, but he didn't build out like Peter Eisenman, had a huge, big project that, big Peter project, and I remember, Reiser Yamamoto's project. I don't remember all the others, but they were all built architectural things. And Cedric Price basically left it alone. And, and he claimed that it was the lungs of the city. And he was totally drunk at the time when he made the presentation. And it was very apparent, that he was not entirely healthy, but he was like not entirely there, and I think it was alcohol related. I think that's my memory of it, but it was pretty incredible. And when it came to the vote, I thought his was absolutely by far the best, And even though, he came in with nothing, I thought it was great. It was brilliant. Um, and so we had this big argument, of the jury. And of course I lost. I was the only one that chose Cedric Price, and everybody else chose Peter Eisman. And so Peter won. And, it was published. I mean, of course, it was not a real project. It was a hypothetical project. It was always a kind of idea because nobody knew what to do with Hudson Yards. And, it sat vacant because no one could figure out how to build on this rail yard that had so many, active lines on it, and they couldn't be taken away. And so, how do you do that? And it wasn't until, much later that related company, that was ultimately the developer, figured out how to build a platform, by needling the columns between tracks and then building on a platform and then building up from that and transferring loads that, they're able to make Hudson Yards east, and then they're going to be doing the west side of the yards. So that's kind of how that happened. But back in, 1999, whenever that was, there was no real plan to do anything.
And eventually you started saying that you started expanding the building. And so you expanded it on the plaza on one end and into the building on the other end by
Yeah.
tripling the footprint in a way.
Yes, exactly. So we proposed, the original proposal for the High Line had 5 sheds, 5 nesting pieces, like Russian dolls, they all, and it went north-south across the site. And then, it related, so you can't take all that space. That's our public open space. And so, here's your footprint. You have to do the footprint this way because we thought we had this small footprint. We thought we could expand to the north, and it would just be some of the time that it would be, used that way, and some of the time it would be nested. But then they said, this is the orientation. And So the site we had was, was quite small to begin with. And we had this idea, okay, let's just have one nesting piece. And it would be, it would expand when we needed to do large scale things. It would contract when we needed to use outdoor space and so forth. You wouldn't have to heat and cool it all year round if you didn't have the programming for it. And it was conceived that way. And we convinced the city and related that we would expand to the east. And sometimes, as part of the year that would be covered, and part of the year it would be, and you could push of a button, you could expand and contract it, so you could do it anytime. But like 50% of the time it would be open, 50% of the time it would be closed across the year. And closed meaning like you would have expanded large scale shows. So that was accepted. It was, we were designing that building. And then there was the site next to us, just to the west of us, that we knew that that was a building footprint for a tall building, because all of these buildings would be tall. And we were asked if we would be interested in designing that tall building, and along with David Rockwell. And we thought, no, not really, because we don't do that sort of thing. We've never done a tall building, and working for a commercial, a client or a developer was totally contrary to the shed, because that was to be a public building, a cultural building, a 501c3, non-for-profit, and so forth. And so Kate Levin was the cultural commissioner at the time, said, you really should reconsider. You should really do this building because you want a good neighbor next to the shed. And yeah, so we thought about what she said, and she was really right, because what happened, we took this on, and we said, okay, well, why not? We've never done a tall building. Let's do that. That could be fun and exciting, but it's for a totally different client than the shed. So we had to put on a different hat. But we figured if we were the architect for both, we could actually negotiate with ourselves, on both sides, and we could probably find the best answer, to all sorts of questions that would arise. And it was the best decision to be made, because the footprint of the Hudson, of the tall building site, of the residential building site, had to grow, because the proportion that was left for it didn't leave the proper space for them, to actually have the program they needed to do the business plan that they had. So it had to grow. That meant that our sites had to overlap. And so, we figured out how to make that happen, where the structure was transferred from the tower, back into a shared core, and we could put our core, with our loading dock and all of that, into a space that was not really ours to begin with, and basically have our loading dock, our core, for our elevators and everything like that, on the footprint of the residential tower. And then we were able to negotiate with the city and related to take the lower portion of the building, past the lobby, but in the height of our shed, and to be able to take that space for us, for our mechanical, for our back of house, our offices, our theatrical back of house spaces, all of that stuff that we needed, that we didn't want to take the space from our small footprint. And in exchange, the developer would build higher, that same amount of stories taller, as long as they were building, 68, well, if they built 75, what's, is it really that different? We were able to, because we're in the middle of all of this, we're able to get that space for the shed. and to protect the shed. And so we actually took that footprint and the original footprint, and we effectively, got the space to the east of it that's the same size. And then we got the footprint to the west of it, which is also, not exactly the same size, but roughly, but multiple levels of it, which increases the area that we initially had. So, this all happened. We could have never predicted all of this. We just started to work and it just made sense.
It's actually fascinating how buildings in New York start intertwining and going into each other's spaces. Similar happened happened at MoMA with Jean Nouvel's building, right? So
exactly, yeah.
Designed went on the first several floors into his space.
Yes, exactly. Exactly, because MoMA bought that site, MoMA owned that site, and it was, it was beneficial for them to, have a building over that site. It's, the same thing. We have the MoMA tower, the other MoMA tower, that is that is, Pelly, that Pelly was responsible for, so like this is New York, like the museum is the lower levels, to level 5, of those buildings. And if we could go across the site and actually control those levels, we're fine. If somebody builds above us, it actually could be okay, So yes, it's like mixed use in the end. And there's a separate entrance, for the for the residents of the tower. And in that case, MoMA, but Heinz then owned, that piece of property, but with the condition that MoMA could use those lower levels, and those belong to MoMA. I don't exactly know contractually how that worked, but we were able to build out MoMA's galleries into that space that was ultimately on the Heinz, property. So it was conjoined at the bottom. And yeah, that's how that project, was able to happen, because MoMA actually ran out of space, and they had to, they owned a lot of real estate, and they couldn't, it was important to them to, to let other possibilities happen for MoMA to be protected financially.
In one of your interviews, you said that in order to be an architect, you have to be a mind reader, an archaeologist, a psychologist, a dreamer, a poet, and you said you have to be a politician. If you could just expand a little bit on that.
Well, to be able to work in cities and to be able to stand up to the forces that are operating in cities, very complex. You have community issues, you have preservation issues, you have city legal issues, you have your own client issues. There are just so many things, that, you have neighbors, you have and then so you have to speak to many audiences at the same time. And when in Lincoln Center, we realized that, it was a maturing process for us, because we had to explain the very same set of ideas to all these different audiences. We had to explain them to, to the city, because there's some of the properties on city land, and the city was investing some money, and it had a task force on Lincoln Center that was very complex. We had to work with all of the city agencies. And then, we had to work with the community board that, was scared of change, because they, thought that, we would make Lincoln Center more exclusive somehow. And it was just the opposite. We wanted to open it up. We had to deal with preservation groups that were, the Dan Kiley landscape, we can't touch it, The Pietro Belogolovsky building, this is the Juilliard building, was on the historic register. We had to, we had to surf our way through all of this, plus the actual clients, each of there were 12 constituent organizations at Lincoln Center, and each had a vote. And you had to have you had to have unanimity, not majority, unanimity to be able to make any change. So that means you had to convince all 12, and they never got along with each other. They never, they didn't play, ball in the same court. They shared the same address and mechanical plant, but they didn't talk to each other. They were competing for the same philanthropic dollars and all of that. So, we learned that we had to speak differently to different audiences, but it was the same project, the same intent, the intentions, but try to imagine what was at stake for each of those constituencies. The boards, like each client, we did many different projects at Lincoln Center. So each client had a different, set of objectives, and so there were different projects. There were public space projects, and there were also individual facilities projects. But you just had to. There were committees, and it was very, very complicated. So this ability to be able to speak to different people, and just by tweaking the words, by understanding what their concerns would be, addressing those concerns, we were able to explain the project in different ways. Because if you use the same language for all these different constituencies, it doesn't work. It's even the nuance of the language and the nouns you use and the adjectives. And so, that's basically it. That's why, I think that before we started to do this public work and city work, we were, with this institutional critique background, we were always critiquing. We were always throwing grenades at things. Our projects were always critical. They were also always bringing up the issues, but they were never generating the solutions. And that's, when we started to change as a studio, we started to really think that the critical process could also be generative, and it could produce new solutions. And I think that that's part of the whole transformation of the studio. It's the evolution, not transformation, but how the studio evolved from making public projects, with our own hands, and doing them on borrowed sites, to actually being able to do large scale projects, for the city, and different cities in different parts of the world, and so you have to be able to understand who you're speaking to.
You've been working on this book for a couple of years. I wonder, after going back to many of the projects, looking at them, after they were completed from a different angle, different experience, anything you learned from the process?
I think just putting it together in one place and trying to figure out how to structure it, we actually learned the interconnections, like some kind of unconscious interconnections between these projects. And it was therapeutic to actually do this, to see it, to make sure, we could actually discuss it. And it was very eye-opening to go to the beginning, to 1981, to when we did traffic, this project, in Columbus Circle with 2,500 traffic cones. I feel as proud of those projects today as I did then. Nothing has changed. There's no project in this book that I feel embarrassed about, that I think, oh, that was so ridiculous of us. It made me, that's the therapeutic part. I realized that it's the same set of brains. It's the same, the motivation it did mature, and it expanded to add, like built architecture as rooted to the ground. master plans, parks. It started to include more and more things, not at the exclusion of the independent projects, because they continue to this day. And so that's, one of the most kind of wonderful things that we learned by doing this book, that we believe everything that we did there, and it represents us today as much as it did then.
Yeah, Liz, congratulations again on this book, and it's a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Vladimir. It's good to, have a chance to talk and catch up.